Thank you, Kevin/Brian. I appreciate that. Look, I do thank you all for coming out tonight. It's obviously takes some effort to get out with all the stormy weather we're having, and I appreciate you coming out. Yes, I think it was going back to the beginning of this year when Kevin Rogers gathers a few of us up at his place and says, now what are we going the topics for this year? And he goes down and says, well, why don't you do this, you do that, you do that. And then he looked at me and said, would you like to do near-death experiences? And I gasped, I chewed on my tongue a bit, but well, no one else was volunteering at that stage, so here we go. Yes, you can see the X-Files, they're the group, was it Mulder and Scully? I thought I'd just put them on because obviously one does have to investigate some mysterious things when it goes into this topic. So, this is the broad steps I plan to take as we go through it. What is it? What is it? As a Christian, I do look to the Bible to see, well, is there any record of it happening there? We do recognise there is scepticism of anything not natural, and that will come out. And then I'm going to look through what studies have been done of near-death experience and proposed explanations. And finally, I've got a video clip of a surgeon who has seen people die on his operating table and then seen them come back to life. And he's talked to them, and I won't steal any thunder now. We'll go and look at that one shortly. Yes, I do use Wikipedia a lot. Perhaps I'm lazy in doing that, but I do find a lot of the references are all gathered there, and you can then make some further searches. But what is NDE? It started, as far as we know, in modern history anyway, back in about 1890s when a French term was used by Victor Hugo to describe people who are falling. And what did that go through their mind as they were falling? Climbers, actually, in the Alps. And they had this panoramic review of life. And then, well, at the same time, there was a group of psychologists, but in particular Albert Heim, put together a series of subjective observations, not only of people falling, soldiers, climbers who've fallen from heights, or other individuals who've come close to death, drownings, accidents, etc. First time the phenomenon was described as a clinical syndrome. And then history goes on, and by the time you get to 1968 and 70s is the time that you do get a lot more study going on. And by 1968 you have 400 first accounts gathered by Celia Green of out-of-body experiences. Professor Kenneth Ring in 1980 summarised the stages, as you can see there: peace, body separation, entering darkness, seeing the light, entering the light. Now, as I say, I'm a Christian, so I do look to the Bible to see if there's any examples given there or anything. And I look in the second letter of Corinthians, chapter 12, Paul talks about experience of going up to the third heaven. And one might think, well, this sounds a bit similar to that. So again there, but it says it occurred 14 years before he wrote the letter, and that actually places it before a lot of his own near-death experiences that he records in the preceding chapter. You can list a number of things that he went through. He was stoned, flogged, and lashed, and was near to drowning on one occasion. He lists lots of things that happened to him. But all of that would have happened after he had what was experienced in that particular book in the Bible. So I don't think I can say that was a near-death experience. What we do have in both Old and New Testaments are accounts of resurrections. But I myself, and I might stand corrected here, I see no account of any near-death experience. Even Jonah goes down, depends on whether you believe it or not, went into a whale or a big fish, swallowed. But when he gives the account, he doesn't seem to relate anything that was close to what you might have seen in the earlier slide. So he just doesn't seem to have any reference to that. So for that reason, I was sceptical. I've not had a near-death experience, I'll be honest here. I don't know if any of you have. You might like to share afterwards if you have. But at the moment, I've not had a near-death experience, and so I am somewhat sceptical. But you saw all the lists and studied, and people have given their accounts of what they have experienced. So it seems to be out there, so I have to give them that credit. Now, I'll just remind you, of course, the paradigm of scientific thinking and explanation these days. This actually is the judgment given when there was an attempt in Philadelphia, I think it was, to bring bring creation to be taught next to evolution in the schools. And Judge Jones, who gave the ruling, made the following comments. And I'll just, there's a self-imposed convention of science which limits inquiry to testable natural explanations about the natural world as methodological naturalism. We do not try and look for any explanation outside natural things. In summary, that's what it says. So let's now go on to see what psychologists and others have attempted to use to explain what happens when people experience near-death experiences. There are three explanatory models, spiritual or transcendental models, we'll go into those shortly, psychological explanations, and physiological, organic explanations. According to Grayson, a psychologist, you've got the reference there, NDE phenomena cannot be easily explained without current knowledge of human physiology and psychology. For instance, at a time when they were unconscious, patients would accurately describe events as well as report being unable to view their bodies from an out-of-body spatial perspective. They were actually able to report things even though others were able to observe them unconscious on the table. What was that experience from? In two different studies of patients who had survived a cardiac arrest, those who had reported leaving their bodies could describe accurately their resuscitation, procedures, or unexpected events, whereas others described incorrect equipment procedures. So there seems to be some inconsistency then. And he goes on. Now delving a little further, Sam Parney refers to two cardiac arrest studies, one deep hypothermic circulatory arrest study where patients reported visual and or auditory awareness occurring when their brain functions had ceased. In other words, there was no electronic activity, the ECGs were not picking up anything, and yet they still had some recollection or some memory of something that they said while they were supposedly no longer alive. And these reports were corroborated with actual and real events. In fact, that's the Transcendental model more than anything. But we'll look at that as an example, because when I do the video clip, that's an explanation there. Depersonalization model for the psychological, expectancy model, dissociation model, and the birth model. A depersonalization model was proposed in the 1970s that NDE can best be understood as a hallucination. According to this model, those who face their impending death become detached from surroundings in their own bodies and no longer feel emotions and experience time distortions. This model, however, suffers from a number of limitations to explain NDEs for subjects who do not experience a sensation of being out of their bodies. In other words, there's an inconsistency. There's no common thread that seems to say if you, in fact, get close to death, then you will be detached, you'll have all those things. It doesn't always work that way. The expectancy model suggests that although these experiences would appear very real, they are actually being constructed in the mind in response to the stress of an encounter with death and did not correspond to a real event. In a way, they're similar to wish fulfillment because someone thought they were about to die, they experienced certain things. Imagining a heavenly place was in effect a way for them to soothe themselves through the stress of knowing that they were close to death. However, this is again where it doesn't quite become consistent. Subject accounts often differ from their own religious and personal expectations regarding death, which contradicts the hypothesis that they have an imagined scenario based on their own cultural and personal background. So again, good theory, good proposition, but it doesn't fit the actual results of actual data or of observations that people report after they've had those near-death experiences. The psychological model proposes NDE as a form of withdrawal to protect it from an individual from a stressful event. Under extreme circumstances, some people may detach from certain unwanted feelings in order to avoid experiencing their emotion, impact and suffering associated with them. I don't know about you, but there are times if they're facing a difficult exam, I would try and ignore the fact that I had to do the exam. Sometimes about to get an injection for something and I turn away. I think it's a personal nature to try and ignore what's about to happen to you. The person also detaches from one's immediate surroundings, and so on. In fact, and the person also detaches. So that's another theory that's out there. Then there's the psychological birth model. The birth model suggests that NDE could be a form of reliving the trauma of birth. Since the baby travels from the darkness of the womb to light and is greeted by the love and warmth of nursing and medical staff, it was proposed that dying brain could be recreating the initiation to life, the tunnel. However, again, is that some of the people who have this experience were actually caesarean by birth, so they didn't have that particular experience. They couldn't say that that was their birth. So again, there's an inconsistency there in matching what subjects report to what actually happened to them. Then we have physiological, organic explanations. Again, you can see a list there and I'll just run through each of those. The organic neuroanatomical model is with two types of brain-based, left brain or right brain. I think guys are left brain, is that right? I think we're left brain and girls are right brain. Anyway, I'm not sure how this works, but...
right brain's the creative side, left brain's the logical.
That's the one. We pretend to be logical, don't we? Due to be predominantly right hemispheric brain damage affecting the right temporal parietal, that's a word, yes, junction, and characterised by out-of-body experience, altered sense of time, sensations of lightness and flying. And could be due to the left side, affects the left temporal junction and characterised feeling of presence, meeting and communication with spirits, seeing of glowing bodies, as well as voices, sounds and music without flying. They've admitted, that those that have written on that subject admit that their model remains speculative due to lack of data. Likewise, Grayson, another of the authorities I quoted there before, writes that although some of the models proposed may serve to explain NDEs and pathways through which they are expressed, they remain speculative at this stage since they have not been tested in empirical studies. It's great having theory, but ultimately it must closely match the data that we experience, that we can report on. So always test theory with empirical results. Some theories hypothesise that NDE is caused by drugs used during resuscitation. So if you are laid out on a table being operated on, then yes, you may be fed various drugs and so on to stabilise you. And maybe these drugs were the things that were causing changes in the brain that made you have certain thoughts. According to Parnia, neurochemical models are not backed by data. This is true of NMDA, receptor activation, serotonin, endorphin release models. Now, again, I'm not a medical practitioner. Linda over there is, and maybe some of the rest of you are. I'm just quoting the results over there. Again, another model, again, they cannot really say that that's a workable model. There's no real evidence. And then we have the multi-factorial models. It includes endorphins, and you can read those words, the limbic system, the temporal lobe, and other parts of the brain. Other authors suggest that all components of near-death experience can be explained in their entirety via psychological or neurophysiological mechanisms, although the authors admit that these hypotheses have yet to be tested by science. Lots of theories, lots of theories. And then low oxygen model that can give hallucinations. This is because low oxygen levels characterise life-threatening situations and also by the apparent similarities between NDEs and G-force-induced loss of consciousness. When you're flying a plane, of course, a faster one, and you pull the stick back, the blood goes down from your brain and you do start to have greyouts. So it's similar to that. These episodes are observed with fighter pilots experiencing very rapid, intense acceleration that results in lack of brain, which is what I just said before. There was this gentleman named Winery, I think it is, studied almost 1,000 cases of G-induced loss of consciousness and noted how the experiences often involved tunnel vision, or how the experiences tunnel vision, bright lights, floating sensations, etc., vivid dreams, euphoria, inclusions of families and friends, and prior memories. So yeah, maybe there's a similarity there. However, hypoxic-induced accelerations primarily characterize a rhythmic jerking of the limbs, comprising memory events just prior to the onset of unconsciousness, tingling extremities that are not observed in near-death experiences. Again, not a bad hypothesis, but it doesn't really have much commonality with near-death experiences. So again, good hypothesis, and it's good floating that idea, but again, it doesn't really seem to match the experiences of what's actually been seen. And indeed, loss of consciousness do not feature life reviews, mystical experiences, and long-lasting transformation after effects. And again, perhaps that's because the subject had no anticipation. Well, I think if I lost consciousness or about to lose consciousness in my plane, I think I would probably fear dying, but anyway, there's no expectation of dying. And they are actually characterised by distress and agitation, which I would have thought actually matched that. But that's the words that were there from that source. Altered blood gas models, some suggested carbon dioxide. However, studies are difficult to interpret since NDEs have been observed both with increased levels as well as decreased levels. Again, another hypothesis, but again, not at all really confirmed by the data. There's nothing consistent there. And then some reports of NDEs might be based on false memories. And then there's a cross-cultural aspect. According to Grayson, the central feature of NDEs are universal and have not been influenced by time. These have been observed throughout history and in different cultures. These, notwithstanding cultural influences, have probably played a role in some NDEs reported descriptions. So you can't say it's a particular group of people who perhaps have some history, some belief in near-death experiences. No, it appears not to be that way. Everyone throughout, in various historic contexts under different cultures, can have reported near-death experiences. Even though perhaps something that was experienced and thought about during an NDE may have been influenced by the culture they came from. So that's where I've got to. Yes, I've just put up a lot of words there. I think in summary, yes, there's a lot of theories out there, but there's nothing there you could really say is coming with solid evidence from the facts that have been observed or reports that you get from people who've experienced it. So you go to YouTube, and that's what I did. Went to YouTube. You can see a bunch of reports on near-death experience, many of them from subjective people themselves who've experienced it. So I actually thought, is that a valid one to show you tonight? No, I mean, I could show you lots of them, but I'm not going to spend all night doing that. I wanted to go to something that probably was a bit more objective. So, and I've already alluded to this, surgical staff are the ones who do observe people who are dying. Hopefully most of their patients do recover. I should ask Leonard, has anyone died in your presence? Leonard, you've had to experience that. I'm sure that's the case. Particularly surgeons, you know, that you do find that they will see people who've passed away as they're trying to operate. Most of them probably recover, but not everyone. And therefore, they will see a number of them. So it's not just a one-off experience, which may be biased as a special event. They can stand back and think, oh, I've seen that experience, and can perhaps relate and correlate what they've seen over the years as they've performed operations. So this is where I'm going to now play this, and at the end of it, I'm going to ask if you heard all of it, because if you feel it was a bit hard to understand, and it is an American accent, then I will ask that we perhaps play it again, or suggest we might play it again so you can capture it all again. See the interview. The guy on the left is Dr. Lloyd Rudy, and I was just telling Brian before, sadly he has passed away, so he actually probably knows what it is like to go all the way on this. Okay, folks, I don't think I can top that. It was fairly dramatic, wasn't it? Okay, I think it's now time to have a break.
First question from me on this one, Steve.
Yeah.
Did you do any experiments in your preparation?
No. No, I can't say I did.
Not like the movie Flatliners.
No. But yes, it's out there. Look, I guess this is really, we should ask, well, anyone here wish to contribute any experience you've had? Anyone else has had in this area?
Well, I've had a few incidents in my life when I thought I was going to die.
Yes.
It's a bit different. But I never had a near-death experience, anything like these things that have been mentioned tonight.
So in other words, having a near-death experience that you thought like it didn't prompt one of these experience type things?
Not in my case.
As in, that was one of their theories.
Once when I was a child, I thought I was going to drown. Maybe anxious. I was certainly very anxious. I called out in a childlike way. I think it prompted faith. It prompted me to call out to God.
Yes.
And people as well.
Yes.
But I've never had a near-death experience.
No.
Yeah, I almost drowned a couple of times, and felt like I was. It was just a purely physical thing, being tumbled around Christie's Beach in a wave and not knowing which way was up and then whether I was going to come up, and just this physical sensation.
Yes. No.
Another time when I had an operation that needed a general anaesthetic, I wasn't the least bit anxious, but you know, you are losing. You're being deliberately, your lack of consciousness is being deliberately induced. So that's, you experience that. That happened so suddenly, and I wasn't really anxious at all. So.
I suppose another theory is that a lot of these cases happen in hospitals and on operating tables.
Yeah.
They could be induced by the anaesthetic. Obviously, in your case, you had no such experience, at least that you remember.
No.
And all of these ones they remembered.
The next thing I'm conscious of was coming round, and it's a few hours later, coming around in your hospital bed in the recovery room.
There's one question I had about a couple of the facts that were put up there in the slides. Sure. On one of the slides it said there were standard features of near-death experiences, and on another study it said that different people had different experiences of near-death experiences.
Yes, right towards the beginning there was a generalised view of light at the end of the tunnel, I think towards the front. Was that the one? Let me bring it up and then we'll go and have a look. Because I think I know the one, but I might be wrong.
There was one towards the end that said that there were central features of near-death experiences. I thought,
not that one then, okay. And then towards the end there was something that particularly...
Well, no, it just made that statement. It didn't go through them. It just made the statement that there were central features. And then there was a study that said that some people experienced certain kinds of near-death experiences and a lot of other people didn't. And there was a diversity.
Okay, so a bit of a contradiction there. Okay. That was certainly one of the things that they were talking about, for instance...
that was the one.
Oh, that one.
that was the one where the central features of NDEs are universal and not been influenced by time.
Yeah.
And then I thought the study indicated earlier on that they were various rather than universal.
There are
and central.
definitely. Okay, now what I can say is that certainly on the couple of ones come to mind then. Firstly, the theory that you're experiencing going back to your birth and as though you're coming out of the birth canal, etc., that was inconsistent with those that had C-section, because obviously they came straight out of the womb that way, not the other way. So there are inconsistencies there, as well as there was a comparison with those who have loss of consciousness due to deprivation of oxygen. Again, there was differences what they experienced from what generally those who actually have a near-death experience.
So what are the central features then? If we could just recap on that, because I'm not sure everyone else...
Good. Well, look,
exactly
again,
right.
having not experienced it myself, I'm really only quoting what I see in the literature, and I'll be quite honest, I'm by no means an expert here, and probably for those that are interested, there's this Ring, investigation near there. Right at the bottom of each of the slides is a reference to a particular science study, but that's 5-stage continuum. Whether everyone goes through...
So entering darkness and seeing the light, I mean, how can they be standard near-death experiences when they're like almost opposite?
It is like the light at the end of the tunnel.
It's a stage.
You heard.
Sorry?
These are
stages.
stages.
You start off with
Yes.
peace,
Yeah, that's
and then you body separation, entering
Yes.
darkness, seeing the light, entering light.
And you do go into dark, almost as though you're going, you are dying. You're dying, your consciousness, your light, the sense through your vision is darkening. You're going down into darkness, and then a light appears somewhere. Again, I've not experienced it, but that's it. And that's what Dr. Rudy said as well.
Right.
That he quoted that as his own account of what people have told him when they've come off his operating table and have been through that as well. Again, having not experienced it myself, having not been a surgeon myself, I'm only reporting third hand what I've read and heard from
And of all the people that have had near-death experiences, what percentage of them, you may not know this, but I wonder I'm just wondering
Yes.
in the head, what percentage of them would experience this kind of sequence?
Yes, well, I could only suggest perhaps some of the references at the bottom might say there, but it was interesting. I'll just go back to perhaps this slide here, that obviously it was sufficiently known that someone latched onto it back in France in the 1890s. Someone has thought it sufficiently... Oops, how do I just bring it up? Trying to bring this up as a presentation. Where is it? Ching. There we go. Oh, sorry. I'll just bring that up and remind you that starting around about the 1890s, but probably well before that, there was no doubt anecdotal evidence. People would chat, maybe in a pub or somewhere. I nearly died and I had this experience. But by 1890, there was enough psychologists who had heard enough accounts of it that they thought, wow, it's worth looking into it. So it was sufficiently widespread, people who perhaps had a fall, and maybe it was just happened to be close to, maybe this Victor Egger happened to be close to the Alps and heard of people who had falls and then decided to, and they
So
heard
the
this counsel.
phenomenon is specifically that phenomenon, that sequence of moving into out-of-body experience and darkness and...
That's what I believe as far as my brief, and I'll be very honest here, my brief readings are concerned. Yeah.
I reckon is that Dr. Ring probably researched some people's research or interviews people got this experience for significant number of people,
And made
some
a,
of
made
them
a, made
about
a
this stage.
theory.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
One video clip I did see, though, suggests that some people have had a number of re-experience of it. They've not just had once in their life, they've had 3 or 4. Perhaps they were getting old and they were getting close, or maybe they were just of ill health, but they had not just 1, but 2 or 3 or 4 near-death experiences.
Some people experience like a heaven and a hell experience, like after this, and they actually come back with an experience of what they've seen as well. So
They
it's
do.
A bit like, I'm just continuing on.
Yes.
It's a bit like some people take another step forward,
Yes.
not just seeing the light,
Yes,
going into the light and having someone take them by the hand or
Yes.
guide them
yes,
into another reality or another
yes.
something.
Yeah, and I did allude to Paul's account of him going into the third heaven, but as I said, I don't think I could say that that was actually due to a near-death experience. It seemed to be another sort of vision he had. So I'm not
He
sure.
doesn't
But you're right.
imply that, does he?
No, it doesn't. It's
It's just saying when I was getting stoned, I had this near.
that's right.
It doesn't say so.
He doesn't know whether it was in the body or out of the body.
That's
he
right.
said.
Yeah. And the fact that he specifically said it was 14 years earlier, and looking at when we believe 2 Corinthians was written, that was, he may have had other experiences we read nothing about before he became a Christian, in which he had near death, but we don't know about those. But anyway, the upshot is, yes, I agree. I've heard of people who've said they've actually got to heaven and seen loved ones there and so on. But because I guess I wanted to present as I guess as objective account as I could, and I felt that surgeon gave a quite convincing argument from being a professional who watches people hopefully revive, but sometimes die in front of him and then revive. And he was obviously right there towards the end of his account, said, I had talked to 13 other surgeons, and each of them, or most of them, have had similar experiences themselves.
A man by the name Ian McCormack had a death experience in Indonesia. Anyway, he died and had this, heaven and hell experience.
Yes.
And he came back to life, like we're talking 2 days after it,
Yes.
in the morgue with a
Yes.
tag on his toe.
Is that right?
So he's coming back and telling the story,
Yes.
and he was given the choice, by Jesus, whatever, or
Yeah.
an angel, whatever,
Yeah.
to come back or not
Yeah.
to come back.
Yeah.
And he's come back and basically, after that, gone around to a lot of different churches and actually said, this is my experience.
And yet that, if I may say, I don't want to be, that actually contradicts what Jesus' parable about Lazarus going down into the grave room.
He didn't. He had.
Do you know the man?
I know the one you're
Ian
talking about. He was bitten by 4 box jellyfish,
Ah, okay.
and he wasn't. Well, he did. He actually died in the ambulance.
Yes.
Well, yeah. And at that point, he said, unbeknown to him, his mother had been waking up in the middle of the night and was praying
Yes.
for him,
Yes.
and she was a Christian. He wasn't.
All right. Ah, yes.
But he said what came to memory was the Lord's Prayer, and he
Okay.
started praying that,
Okay.
and basically had a conversion experience
Yes.
there
Even in death, so to
in
speak.
death. So
Okay.
that I felt that very encouraging.
Okay.
So I thought
Yeah.
you can't really, you don't know where anyone is sitting really.
You don't.
You don't
you
know the influences in their lives.
Yes.
So anyway, he did actually, like you say, he was 2 days
Yes. Okay.
in the morgue.
Okay. Well, there you go.
But
I guess, as I say, I'll
it's
call
not
it an
scientific
ending.
enough.
No.
That's a better account because it's more.
Yeah.
You can.
Because I go back, as I say, to that parable of Jesus. I'm not sure we should all take them necessarily literally, the full extent of what is meant to be an illustration rather than actual fact. But he does talk about the beggar going down and then the leg going down, and then on the other hand, the rich man, I think sometimes he's been given the name Dives, saying, please, let me go back and speak to my brothers to tell them never to do that. And Jesus said, no, you can't go back. They've got the prophets, listen to them. Oh, but if someone comes back from the dead, they'll listen. No, if they don't believe the prophets. So anyway, just that illusion where near death perhaps, but final death it seems you can't come back. Yeah. But look, any other comments from anyone?
I was interested in the quote you had up there that said that done research from a lot of different cultures over a
Yes.
long period of time, and basically the same story, based on their cultural background, they may have had different interpretations of it,
Yes.
but there's still the basic same story behind it all.
And that's another thing for saying this seems to be authentic. It's not as though, you know, it was one culture has quite a different experience from another culture. There's always the darkness, the light at the end of the tunnel, and those 5 phases, or at least some of those 5 phases in every culture. No matter what their religious beliefs or
not
otherwise.
everyone has them. I mean, people are near death and have a near-death kind of experience without having this particular near-death experience, don't they?
Yeah, yeah.
Who's the guy? Famous. He got his famous Australian who died.
Paul Hogan?
No,
Steve Irwin.
not Steve Irwin.
Not
the
Victor.
one whose son owns. They own all the casinos and stuff.
Oh,
Kerry Packer.
Kerry Packer.
Yes.
He got given a kidney by his
Okay.
father.
Helicopter Bob.
Yeah, but he was actually, he said that he'd been to the other side and there was nothing there. That was his comment. Because he
Yes.
said he didn't have an after-death experience,
Okay.
even though he did
Yes.
come back to life.
Yes.
So that's probably.
Okay.
So,
Look, I'm sure, like anything psychological, to do with the human behaviour, etc., there's a whole range of experiences, and to try and, so it's only going to be like this, and this is going to be way off the mark. It's almost, there is an experience, not everyone will have it, and in many cases this is the phase of that experience, not everyone will have all of those. Just like all of our human behaviour is varied and will continue to vary, but nevertheless there is something, well, particularly it's when the surgeons, and it was that video clip, if you like, I really wanted to show that, because to me, having been a skeptic before that, I saw that and I said, I've got to show that, because this guy, it's part of his job to bring people back to life, and yet he's seeing people dead and about to pronounce them dead, and yet has seen them come back to life and has had these experiences. That's something that certainly confronted me as saying, well, yeah, there must be something in it. Good. Well,
I think we're getting an very early night.
Nobody that I resuscitated
yes,
ever reported any
Didn't they?
near-death
didn't
experience.
they? Right.
So,
And I'm sure there'll be many doctors. I guess it's a cardiac surgeon is someone who is operating at that point where the heart may cease to function, and would therefore see quite a number of near-death experiences. Or would have more opportunity to see near-death experiences, probably the better way of putting it.
Yeah, I see some.
Yes, yes.
This might be throwing sort of a wet rag over all this, but I'm very dubious about all this whole subject.
Yes.
And I kind of think, well, let's say that people have actually experienced this. So what? And what if someone is near death and they experience entering darkness, and then they see some light, and then they come back to this light? So what? You know, what is it? What
It's
is it?
supposed to be symbolic in some sort of a way, isn't it? But
Where were they going?
oh,
Were
well,
they
moving into the
heaven,
light
or
is
the light
symbolic
of
for
hell, or what?
finding,
You know?
heavenly peace or whatever.
It does mean that there's something more than just this life, if that's all true.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty.
They
It's not very
experience- they-
substantial.
They enter darkness and they see some light, and they enter then they come back here. So, and what if they actually, you know, I kind of don't believe these things about leaving the body. But let's say that one,
Yes.
the one video clip you did show, it is interesting that according to the surgeon, he said that person who was being operated couldn't have known about those post-it notes.
Yes.
And that's the one thing, I've never heard anything like that before.
Yes.
But mostly you think, oh yeah, they see the people. Well, they would have known that those people were there anyway. But what if they did actually what if that was actually their experience? They actually,
Yeah.
let's say that what they are thinking and recounting did actually happen. That they're actually moving around. So what? What is it? Earth is it?
Well, I guess.
Significant. I think.
You're either saying you're
I'm not a
lying or
materialist.
you're not.
I'm not a materialist. I do believe
Lying
there are
with
things
mistake.
beyond our explanation, and there, there could be very many things that we can't explain. I'm quite willing to admit that. But what happens? So what if these things actually happen?
Well, if people are floating out of the body experiences and are able to look down on us now, I think that's a pretty significant piece of thing to understand is true or not true, if it is true.
I don't know how you prove it.
That's like a spirit leaving the body and being able to observe the
Is
room, what's going on. I think
I think
if it were to be proven, then that would revolutionise spirituality.
That is really the so what.
So. No, I got
It means there is something more than just this naturalistic universe.
material.
yeah, well, I think that anyway. But,
This is the answer to the so what.
But there's someone
I mean,
else
being
who
conscious-
doesn't think that way.
consciousness is something beyond this material.
You might think that, I might agree with you, but there are those who don't.
But the implication is that our spirit, our soul, is beyond the material universe. It's floating up outside our body. And this is the basis of the idea that we have a spirit or a soul.
How
Which is pretty
material is the
substantial
material
kind of
universe now that
thing.
we've got down to
Yeah.
what physics is doing now?
The whole subject doesn't move me at all, really.
Kevin, throw it at me.
Yeah, I know. I know it's a subject out there. Yeah, it really is.
So you have an open mind.
Yes, give it a
I
try.
do have an open mind, but it doesn't actually. The things that are being presented, they don't get you anywhere.
I think for people actually experienced, your soul, your body is separate for themselves, have some meaning for individually, and they share, and they want the world to know. I think that's the so what. So maybe
That means we would have a life beyond our corporeal body. That means that opens up a whole universe of possibility in terms of what could happen after death and what this life could be all about. I mean, it would be an absolutely revolutionary discovery if someone could prove it were true.
So, did you want to say something, William?
I was just going to comment on your paragraph, this self-imposed convention of science which limited inquiry to testable natural explanations about the natural world. That was set up by Francis Bacon
Yes. Okay.
400 years ago.
Okay. Yep.
And one of the things he did in constraining science to that was that he also removed meaning, value and purpose from the remit of science.
Yes.
So when modern scientists say there's no meaning or value or purpose at the end of our studies, well, you took it out before you started 400 years ago.
Yes. Yes.
And that is a methodological naturalism because Francis Bacon was a rabid Democritian and Democritus was the first systematic atheist
Right.
back before Socrates.
Yes. Yes.
And so it all comes from back there.
Yes.
And
It's
Christians who are scientists
Yes.
work with what you might call methodological deism.
Yes.
We only deal with it as it operates when that God doesn't interfere.
Yeah.
So they can do all of their science. And as I was saying over the tea break, 60% of the founders of the Royal Society in 1662, were Anglican clergymen. And they knew all of this back then.
Yeah.
This is what we're studying.
Yes.
And so science constrains itself to all of these, against all of these other things.
Yeah, that's
And-
right. Science talks
It
about
draws a
fact.
boundary
Religion tries to
around
talk
what
about
it
value.
will
they
deal.
have different channel. They work in a different channel. Science is impossible for them to explain the spiritual part.
Yeah,
The spiritual channel, it's hard to, so it's just the work in a different channel.
Well, science have taken the weight of a person prior to death and after death, and the weight has actually changed. So it's a bit like this is science. Something has changed.
Or you mean the weight?
The weight of the person
before they
between
die or
before they died and after they died, this is science, has changed.
Yeah, they
The-
can't.
And this is the weight of this person.
The weight can
The weight
change.
is X, and the weight is X minus whatever.
Oh, okay.
So in grams. So there's a physical difference between living and death, the weight of a person.
there must be a bit of evaporation from the body.
They explain that way
The expiration.
the soul or
Unbelievable.
spirit
Weight,
actually weighs something.
a couple of
But
ounces.
that explanation a bit
It all
vague,
just implies
vague,
it's more
because
a natural.
the lots of factors contribute
So there's weight
to
change.
the weight change.
Yeah,
Weight changes from minute to every minute kind of difference.
There's also film, where they can actually film with cameras now, or certain lights, certain whatever.
To see
They can
the
actually see someone's
of
spirit
your
leaving the body.
Oh, yeah.
Now, just going back, we're reminded that this there was actually a more objective test, Apania, so was the name. Yeah. Oh, I'll just go back to this because I'd forgotten that. Let me come back to this one. Where are we at?
Sampania.
Yeah, there we go. This guy, Sampania. And sorry, your name again?
Luke.
Luke had actually knew a bit more about this guy than I did. Would you like to explain, Luke, what Pania would do to actually test this, please?
I watched a documentary a while ago on Netflix called Story of God, narrated by Morgan Freeman. And he interviewed a guy, Dr. Sampania, and from memory he was saying that I think it was Dr. Sampania who said that he would put photos out of the way in high up places, so that if someone actually
This was in an operating theatre.
if someone passed away in the operating theatre, that when they left their body, they might be able to look down and actually see something, and then see one of those images, and then when they went back into the body, they might be able to recall them to the surgeon, whatever.
So he actually was testing, more or less. I mean, you saw.
What was the result?
I don't know. I haven't actually followed up on it, but
Okay.
so
I just wanted to read
that's for you to actually go look into it more.
What Luke was talking, he actually occurring when their brain functions. These reports were corroborated with actual and real events. It's implied there, and I didn't know this until Luke told me what he did. He plastered things around an operating theatre and was then, in those cases, let's face it, you hope that only 5% or less will actually die, and perhaps only 2 or 3% of those may come back to life again. So of those 2 or 3%, he was able to then ask them, from a position where they could not have seen these images, did you see anything? And he knew what was up on the walls, and he was able to say, yep, they were up there. And that was a bit like the post-it notes that we read about the other doctor.
There may be some
I'm pretty sure
inadequacy
that
in the
was in anyway.
scientific
I'm pretty sure
determination of actual death. You know, they might be saying, okay, when the heart ceases, when the blood pressure is no longer registering, then you pronounce dead. But maybe you're not dead, fully dead. You know?
Oh yeah, I don't deny that, but there seems to be, whether it's purgatory or whatever, there seems to be a state where people who physically, because their heart is no longer functioning, there's no electrical pulses, there's nothing in there, there's nothing that's pumping the blood around.
Maybe they can lie dormant.
There's no ECG, but somehow they are observing things, and it was the post-it notes in that video clip that were there when they were either, first of all, he would have been under sedation, fully under sedation, and then dead, and also with no electrical impulses, and we generally, of course...
See, science doesn't have all the answers. There's a woman who wrote a book on anaesthesia, which I haven't read because it sounded like it'd be a bit challenging because he said that people are actually quite often aware of what's happening to them when they're under general anaesthetic.
Yeah.
And
And that many people have experienced that.
yeah, so I mean, again,
That's why I
science
have
might say, oh, general anaesthesia could have no awareness, but
But the people
They do.
behave differently. From all, there's all spectrum where you can see, you can feel it, you can understand what's going on. To be totally out, it's just it's just physiological.
Yes.
Physiological
Yes.
effect, depending.
Yes.
yeah, but this death might be too. I mean, death, they say are pronounced you're dead, but actually physiologically at some level they haven't yet determined you're not actually dead.
Oh, there are people who've been very alive. There are certain rules that now you have about the length of time you have to live.
Again, just the first account that Dr. Rudy gave, the surgeon, was as an experienced cardiac surgeon, he had pronounced this man dead. All the signs, you mentioned the paper charts were running absolutely flat, absolutely no indication of any activity at all. They put that thing down his, I think something into the chest, no indication of any activity, all qualified medical science could say is this person is dead, and they pronounced him dead. There's nothing, and then what he said, it might have been 20 minutes later, he quoted 20 to 25 minutes later with absolutely flat, suddenly the first tick starts
And
happening.
science gets things wrong, right? Science gets things wrong. Science
Yeah.
It's learning.
Yes,
It's
that's not
exploring.
science. That's just simply in the old days, if a person's heart stopped and was laying in the battlefield, you counts dead, and that'd be that, you bury it. So
Yeah.
it's not science. If you're blaming science, it's
No,
not
I'm just saying that
Science is
science
method.
is not
Science is
foolproof.
method.
Science is not foolproof, is it?
Science is a
No, that's not science. It's just
Science is the
No,
method.
I-
Science is the method. It does change over time.
Sorry?
Science is the method. It does change over time.
Oh.
Yeah,
Developing
scientific
knowledge.
determinations change over
The
time. but
interpreters of science are not infallible.
it's not infallible, yeah.
The interpreters of science make mistakes.
so what's your definition of death then?
Well, you go with the best available
No,
science.
but what is that's a
Yeah, I would go with the best available
No,
science.
no,
I would say
no.
science doesn't have, science
Yeah,
wouldn't have the
no,
whole.
No, but what is the definition of death?
That is if you no breathing, no heartbeat,
Correct.
and your brain don't have the
Electrical.
electrical activity for I forgot for how many minutes.
Yeah, this is
And
Many
a
minutes, yeah.
Yeah.
a convention.
legislation
That's a
on that.
convention. It's
But
agreed
this is
concept
all
principle.
based on observations, on thousands and millions of observations.
Yeah.
But in that case,
But there's a few anomalies.
There's some anomaly. That's
Yeah.
right.
There's exceptions to the rule, so
Yeah.
It's a bit,
Yeah, but-
it's no actual law. to
Yeah.
Say.
Yeah, there is.
And then
It's a human law. It's a human. It's not a fundamental law.
And that's one thing we take from tonight, yes, how to pronounce someone dead, but there's this out-of-body experience, which apparently certainly was there, and as Luke has told us, this other guy called Parnia would plant pictures well above the view of the operating theatre, which corroborated some people who were involved
videos on YouTube for everyone to see it
so
as
yes,
well.
I saw that. I said, so there's this out-of-body experience as well, which, humanly we cannot explain because our eyes are limited to a certain cone of activity. If you've been observed flat out your back, probably with your eyes closed, but even without closed, you probably couldn't see these peripheral regions, and yet people were able to come back afterwards and say, yeah, I
I've
saw
heard
that.
of a case of a blind woman who
Yes.
actually died on the
Yes.
operating table in surgery,
Yes.
right? And
Yes.
she came back to life,
Yes,
and she had an out-of-body experience,
Yes.
and she identified all the
yes,
medical equipment and
Yes.
the colours of it.
even though she was
She
blind.
must have been. She wasn't blind at birth,
Mm.
but she was able to identify what everything was colour and everything. So that was similar to that type of
Yes,
case
yes,
where the doctor
yes,
said
yes.
she obviously something happened.
yes. So, as I said, Parnia has made it an actual proper experiment, as opposed to Dr. Lloyd, who just happened to know the environment that he was operating in and had this revived patient telling him things that there's no way that he could have known about the post-it note. So there seems to be a consistency there. You can have an out-of-body experience. And that is what a message I'm taking home from what...
when the numbers are saying it's a bit like if what they're saying is they interviewed 400 people who come back from death. That's what was on the slide.
Yes.
And a great number of these people are having some type of experience, and this is what we're
Yes.
recording. This is
Yes.
very similar. Some don't, some do,
Yes.
but they're very similar. You know,
Yes.
what they're seeing and what they should be seeing or should be able to identify, e.g. colours. And if you're a blind person, you would have no idea. Well, how come in your spirit you're able to see things in reality?
And that's one of the closing comments by Dr.
Very
Rudy.
hard to explain.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Rob.
Yes, so my question is more about there are probably many people who experience that 20 minutes of death and then
Yes.
come back and don't experience anything.
Anything? No.
So has anybody done any studies on the percentage of that sort of?
I did not come across it. I can't
Because
answer
that occurred to me there. I think, well, we're assuming that everybody that does that experiences
No,
out of body.
if I made that point, then I'm sorry. No, it does not.
Even the ones that come back after some sort of...
I don't believe in. I didn't read anything on it, but I believe
So-
it's
so-
only limited experience. It's limited
It's
experience.
like 1 in 1 million or 1 in 10 million experience, and then 1 in 10 million of those actually experience the actual out of body.
Ah.
So I think a stupid number like that.
Well, yes and no. I mean, this Parnia, the Sam Parnia up there, apparently, I mean, he was obviously went to a particular. It talks about cardiac arrest, and so it was probably in a cardiac clinic or something. Had these pictures and certainly gained. Well, he's published this paper.
Yes, it's in a medical journal.
That's right. So you'd think it would be peer reviewed and properly established that he had sufficient data, be it I guess a sample that he could say yes, this is something that is observed. So
No, it's amazing that he even did it because I mean over a year you might expect only 1 or 2.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Well, probably in New York or Los Angeles, I guess they have a fair few people coming through. Yeah.
We've raised questions with this about what is life and what is death.
Yes.
But the other question that it raises is what is a memory?
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Because these are memories, by the sound of it, under conditions in which, as far as we know physiologically, the neurons can't lay down any memory parts.
No, that's right. Yes.
So what is it?
What is stimulating? Yeah. Where is that? Where is that experience coming from? Yes.
I've heard situations where people have had like a transplant, and these people are coming back with memories of the person who they've got the.
Oh, is that right?
And they can say, look, this, and this, and they're going back to these people and actually asking these questions.
Okay.
And so what we're saying is there a memory actually in the cells of the body where if you're getting body transplant, the memory is actually coming along, and those people can.
I mean, the organ transplant.
Well, that's not something I looked into, I'm afraid, so I can't answer.
I've heard stuff like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Not to that extent, but I have heard some things.
Yeah, I've heard something similar.
So is there a memory within the muscle or within the blood?
That's an interesting. That's another topic for another day. That's a topic.
Where does the spirit live? In the head, in the blood, in the organs.
Yes.
I'd wonder how carefully that's been investigated, whether it's been rigorously done, and
that's
the
right.
lawyer on the track and everything to verify these. Or is it just people imagining? Because especially if you've got a heart transplant from someone else, heck, I'll be thinking a lot about that person where that heart came from and what their life was like. And I could imagine all manner of things,
There's a
Someone
million
really
inventive
tested it.
narratives like this.
No?
There's a million inventive narratives like
Yeah,
this
that's right.
about mystical events
Yeah.
or supernatural events. There's millions of them.
What is
And the divide is in the narrative itself, I think, proving it.
So I'd be, again, I'm a skeptic. I'd be very dubious about this. Has that memory, that alleged memory of the other person, really been tested in a court of law? That kind of quality of examination. I bet it hasn't.
There are some debate about if you need a kidney or if you need a heart, are you willing to accept a very bad person or criminal do so bad things?
Okay.
You are willing to accept their organ for you, for your life?
That implies there's some sort of
Yeah, some.
Something tainted
ethics
about
carried
that.
in the board.
Article.
Yeah.
You want it to be healthy.
Yeah.
You know,
So,
viable. What does it matter what the person's done?
You don't want to heart lungs
yeah,
of a
but some
translator, do
people,
you?
some people,
Some people think that.
critical
Yeah.
thinking,
It's a
yeah.
bit irrational.
Brain transplant.
Yeah.
Have we done those yet? I don't think we have.
There you go. I'm an
I'm
organ donor.
interested
Says so.
why we choose
I'm not
this
because I have to
topic.
die first.
Oh, well,
So any,
yes.
any
Why do we keep
revelation towards you as a Christian?
Actually,
Yeah.
thinking about it? Why do we choose this
What
topic?
was it?
Why-
How's it connected to Christianity?
Ask
it is.
Kevin. Ask Kevin. Look, I think there's a mystical side to it.
Yeah.
And look, a number of the subjects we do here are not necessarily related specific to Christianity. Sometimes we have topics that are not closely related, but are generally to do with the philosophy of life and so on. We actually had, I remember a few years ago, we had one of the leaders of the Islamic faith here in giving his presentation on his beliefs, and so we do, and of course we've had atheists stand up and give us their presentation as well. So we're in a what can I say, a defence of our faith, but one that will listen to what others have to say. Paul stood around in Athens listening to all these other people, with all the other idols. So we are sort of somewhat out on a limb listening to what other people are saying.
But I think the greatest thing, like if this is true, like as has been said,
Yes.
it'll be leaning away from materialism into like a spiritual kind of dimension.
It does, yes.
Like
So
it would open that up as a possibility.
Yes.
Also comes back a lot to what Jeff's been saying about being a skeptic. And I'm one of these people who thinks it is very wise to be skeptical.
Yeah.
But looking into things like this makes us realise that there are more things than our limited experience thus far is aware of, and that we need to be open and skeptical at the same time for more. And that can lead, like this Dr. Rudy, you get the impression the way he spoke that he was not any sort of Christian, but after all these events he was definitely thinking there's more to this God stuff.
It would be one step towards deism. So,
So it kind of gets you thinking maybe there's more than I thought there was. Which can be worthwhile for all of us.
And if I may just go back, that guy from the Islamic Society who spoke here, the one thing that I took home from that, and I don't mind I'm sharing, it's right out of context here, we asked him what is your, what's the right word, his motive for leading the life of righteousness that he lived. He says, it's my fear of judgment day. I want to make sure that the good deeds I've done outweigh my bad deeds. And look, I had to say, yep, I can relate to that. I can relate to that. From my reading of the Bible, it's not that far away. We believe that Jesus has paid all the sacrifice. He'll go into the weight, the balance is weighing up. That's his belief. But, I could relate to his convictions on that. And I got something out of that meeting that night.